Hello and welcome to Development Part 6, more notes on gender. And these notes will be looking at gender development, so talking about from infancy to childhood to adolescence to adulthood, how much nature or biology plays a fact in our gender or identity, and how much nurture our environment does. So we're going to start out with a little bit of biology review about gender as far as from biological points of view. Going back to your biology class, we learned about sex chromosomes. In your last notes, I told you 45 of the 46 chromosomes that you have are completely identical in every way. And what makes you male or female biologically is either the X chromosome or the Y chromosome. Again, this is a biological gender. I'll talk about the definition of gender identity in just a second. So my X chromosome, it's the only chromosome a mother can give. Remember, X are females. In bio, we used to say females are double crossers, right? And then males are XY. And that Y chromosome really doesn't code for a lot, but what it does have is a single gene on the Y chromosome that's considered like a master switch for testosterone production. So I can only get a Y chromosome from a male. Sorry, someone came in the room. So that Y chromosome I was saying is the master switch that turns on the testosterone production. Testosterone, we've talked about, is a hormone. So it is in males and females. We find it more prevalent in males, though, especially during early development, so in utero. So while the fetus is developing, the release of testosterone is responsible for the external parts of an embryo of becoming a male. So you're able to see about the 7th week the external parts of males being produced. It's a lot easier to see on an ultrasound a baby boy because of the external parts versus a girl, all right? So that sex hormone testosterone produced in large amounts, especially during the 7th week, has an effect on male development. So about the 5th month, the hormones again bathe the brain of the fetal baby, right? So in utero, we have this child being, hold on just much better. It's being bathed in hormones in utero, and again, it causes more development of the male brain. Now, what they've found, I'm kind of skip down here, is when hormones are unnaturally injected in developing fetuses. So in a female, if you get large amounts of testosterone, then what would you imagine happens to that developing fetus, even if it's female? And what they have found is that they actually can produce external, so like tiny penises growing on female embryos. They can actually, and they remove those, so they're not functional, but they can actually create the sex characteristics of a male. And what they found is those females actually act a little bit more like tomboys. They're more aggressive, or more interested in things like guns and trucks at earlier age. But as soon as puberty, and that's a big but there, as soon as puberty hits and they have their own hormones being produced, the more estrogen for females, they see this change of gender identity, right? So it does not reverse sexual orientation, meaning that those testosterone injections really early did not affect the sexual orientation of the female. The majority of them still, I think it was like 99% still were heterosexual or identified themselves as heterosexual, and also identified themselves as a female. So gender identity is really what a person feels inside they are. So you may have heard like people that are males saying that they feel more like a female, or females saying that they feel more identity with the males. Okay, so that's gender identity. So I can actually produce testosterone, introduce testosterone into a developing fetus, and that can interrupt its characteristics growing up, the physical organs that develop. But when a person naturally starts to produce hormones, there's no long-lasting effects. Other biological differences that we found in males and females, so going back up here, we found that the frontal lobe is much thicker in women. So frontal lobe here, it's like verbal fluency, your language over here, has thicker or more connections. The hippocampus, so memory, the amygdala with emotions, and then gray matter versus white matter. So gray matter in the brain is considered like the actual neuron body, right? So when during our biology unit, so here's the actual, so this would be the gray matter of the brain, and then the white matter is considered the axon body, and then all the dendrites. Okay, so we consider this gray matter right here, the body, and then the white matter is all this extra stuff. And we find a lot of more white matter in women than we do in males, right? Something to think about. So not necessarily more cells, but more connections in females than we do in males. Okay, so that is our biology of, there we go, skip behind, sorry, our biology of males. Now let's talk about, what about the nurture of gender? So if we talked about the biology of males and females, what happens though nurture-wise, so in our environment? And there's a quote from your book I like that said, what biology initiates, culture accentuates. So what is started from biology, culture is what accentuates it or brings it out. So culture is defined as everything that's shared by a group of people and then passed on through generations. So when we talk about a culture, it's anything shared by a group and then transmitted through generations. So it's passed on. So a role, when we're talking about gender role, you can think of a role as just like you would a role in a play, right? Or your role in a production. It's a cluster of actions that we expect. So if you're playing the role of the student, it would be all the actions or behaviors we expect from a student. If you're playing a role of a male, you would expect these certain things. Okay, so the gender role is what we expect of women and men's behaviors. Right, so our pre-described, what do we expect? This can change from home to public. So sometimes we have gender roles at home, but then we don't want the same gender roles in public. So they can change, right, from place to place, just like you might change your role from being a student to a friend to a sibling to a daughter or son, okay? But here are some things that they have found about gender roles in society just from surveys. So men on average work 1 more hour of work during this day and do 1 hour less of housework. Okay, so on average, men work more and do less housework. 90% of women in the survey they did was taking care of the household things. 90% of women, right, 90% of the time, women are the ones that stay home sick with children. They're the ones to call doctors and to arrange babysitters, right? So that would be a role of a woman, right, is that you take care of people when they're sick, you are the one that calls the doctor, you are the one that arranges the babysitter. Now this might just be the roles that men and women put on themselves in marriage, but they are perpetuated, right, by our culture, right? We have these things that are kind of normed male or female. Okay, so more nurture, talking about our environment. Child rearing, so bringing up children. What can we do to produce that early gender schema, or what can we do to go against that early gender schema? So from a very young age, babies, about 1 or a little bit before they're 1 year old, actually identify males and female voices, males and females faces, and as soon as they get to be toddlers, they like to put things in categories. Mom's song or dad's song. Those are daddy pants or daddy glasses, right? And even in foreign languages, we see like that lay or law is put on to feminine and masculine objects. Now, gender identity is a person's sense of being male or female. And what we do at an early age is we get these schemas of male or female, and we start to place them into those categories. So when we gender type, we start thinking of traditional masculine and traditional feminine roles, and we put those onto new things. So this is great example of schema, assimilation, and accommodation, something that is male or female or doesn't fit into either, and you kind of have to put it into those two things. And then the social learning theory, as far as nurture is concerned, talks a lot about observational learning. So how do we learn what is male and female? Has a lot to do with observing what females do and what males do. What does our mom do? What does our dad do? What does grandpa do? What does grandma do? And kids take in a lot of that stuff. So they learn by observation, and then it's reinforced or punished by operant conditioning, right? So like, those are mommy glasses. You're right, those are mommy glasses. Those are girls' glasses. Good. Right? Reinforced. It'll say it again. Those are daddy glasses. No, those are mommy glasses, right? So that's being punished. So we learn by by seeing, but then we're reinforced by our operant conditioning. So let's look at some of these gender roles in our society and how they've changed over time. So here's a graph looking at the percentage of people in the field, this is going to be women, over the years. So they're looking at psychologists, doctors, and lawyers. So in the 1970s, mid-1970s, we see less than 20% of females being in med school, about 30% in law school, and 45% to get a PhD in psychology. In 2005, so about 10 years ago, we see those all increasing, but still, so females in psychology, 65%, and then we're just about to have to med school and law, all right? So let's talk about what role our parents and our peers play. So I want you guys to be thinking about, to what extent have your parents or your peers influenced the type of gender roles that you take on? This experiment about early brain development, let's talk about our parents. This was done in rats, and because it was so interesting, they kept redoing the study and doing more information on it. So what they wanted to look at was what happens when a child grows up in an impoverished environment versus a engaging environment. So what they did with the rats is they'd either in an impoverished environment keep them very secluded, no touch, no interaction with other rats, very quiet, solitary. And then they found, so they then sliced the brain open, look at the connections of the brain. They found in impoverished rats had very little dendritic trees, right? So not a lot of connections between the parts of the brain. In an enriched environment where they could play, interact, there was touch, what they found is they have much larger brains. Their brains actually grew about 10% heavier in an enriched environment, meaning that not what they were eating, not what they were drinking, but just the growth of the neuron added about 7 to 10% of weight. They took these studies and started applying them to things like zoos. So making sure in zoos where animals are taken away from other things that they have enrichment time and things to play with. And also in homes, like where children are taken and put in to adoption homes or halfway homes, making sure that there is some type of enrichment that they had throughout the day. Okay, so how much blame or credit should we give our parents for our gender and our personality? The things that parenting matters in are definitely things, or we see that at extremes. So extreme parenting as far as bad, we see has a huge effect. Extreme parenting as far as providing the best has a good effect. And everywhere in the middle is kind of gray, right? So we see the extremes at extremes. But what we have found across the board, so even in that gray area, is that parents play a huge role in things like your manners, your political attitudes, your religion, and then your success at work. Okay, so those are things we get from our parents. Where parents don't matter are our personalities, right? So the personalities that people have, less than 10% of siblings have shown to be the same personality. So things that people that came from the same parents, we actually find that 10% or less. So siblings and might as well be a stranger as far as similarities and differences. Okay, as far as our peers, we find that peers have huge influence on us outside of the home, but our parents, I'm going to skip to the end, our parents choose the culture of our neighborhood and where we'll live, so they ultimately choose what peers we will be around. Okay, what they have found with peers influence, so here's some interesting things. So in preschoolers, so pre-K, before 5, we found that children will eat something they don't like if everyone at the table is eating it, their friends, right? So you want your kids to eat broccoli, put them at a table with a bunch of kids eating broccoli. So they're easily influenced by their peers at a young age. Accents, as far as language, what they've found in neighborhoods where people spoke 2 languages or there's accents, is children actually take the accents of their peers, not from their parents. Cigarettes, teens that smoke tend to smoke because their friends smoked or someone asked them, or that was kind of like a peer thing. And then there's something called, actually from your social psych unit, called the selection effect, and that we select people to be around us that have the same characteristics, and we seek out those people to feel like we're with someone that we belong with. Okay, so how much your peers and your biology play into what making you what your gender identities and gender roles. We'll talk about more in class, your personal experiences. Okay, in our next notes, we'll be looking at adolescence, you guys, but for today, I'll see you later.